Welcome, everyone. Can everyone see me and hear me? Great, great, great. Okay, thank you all for coming out to Article 7, the WDI webinar from this evening. It is about reaffirming women's rights to the same opportunities as men to participate actively in sports and physical education. The only way to guarantee fairness and safety is to prohibit boys and even those claiming a female gender identity from women's sports. Keep in mind that our webinars are women only. Men will have the opportunity to watch our webinars on YouTube. Joining us tonight is Ms. Emily Kaht, a marathon runner. Thank you so much for joining us, Emily.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Okay, and so your story.
Sure. So, should I just jump right in?
Absolutely.
Okay. Um, well, good evening. Thank you all for having me. I'm honored to have been asked to speak for this webinar. I hope that by the end, everyone will understand why it's important that men and boys not be allowed to compete in female sports at any level in any sport. And I also hope to be able to inspire everyone watching to take action, even and maybe especially if you feel like it's not your place or you don't know how to go about it because you, like me, consider yourself to be just an average person. So, just to give some background on myself, sports have been a big part of my life ever since I was a little girl. I started off with tumbling and gymnastics, which I did for about 7 years. In high school, I transitioned to track and field, where I specialized in the pole vault. My senior year, I added cross country into the mix. That laid the foundation for a love of long distance running that has stayed with me even as an adult. These days, I run half marathons, full marathons, and other road races. It's impossible to overstate the impact that sports have had on my well being. As a girl, I was painfully shy, easily embarrassed, and suffered from crippling perfectionism. Gymnastics cured me of all that. In a sport where it's possible to crotch the beam or go skidding across the vault table on your stomach, I had to learn to laugh at myself and get up to try again when I fell. On top of that, during the critical developmental window that was adolescence, gymnastics also surrounded me with female teammates who were loud, sassy, mischievous, and unafraid to take up space. This worked wonders for helping to break me out of my shell. They helped me with my shyness, but also my teammates openly discussed and joked about their bodies, especially the most embarrassing parts. This fostered a much more relaxed and healthy relationship with my own body. I'm sure it goes without saying that having a boy on the team would have destroyed that atmosphere. No girl wants to talk about her breasts or her period while a teenage boy is within earshot. Then, as now, sports have given me things to like about my body where I otherwise would have found nothing but things to criticize. As a teenager, I might have wished for a flatter stomach, but I could do the gym class push ups with ease, and that was pretty cool. As an adult, I don't love the spider veins on my thighs, but I do love that my legs can propel me through a marathon, and I have the perspective to appreciate that the latter is more important. In short, since childhood, sports have taught me important lessons, kept me healthy, and added meaning to my days. They are truly, to use a favorite buzzword of the social justice warriors, empowering. Several years ago, I started seeing headlines about transgender stuff. I thought it was inherently ridiculous. The entire premise is that if a person identifies as the opposite sex, it literally makes them the opposite sex. I was angered and disgusted as I read stories about boys being allowed into girls' bathrooms just because they identified as girls. But I thought to myself, eventually, someone is going to do something about this. No one can possibly be taking this seriously. Anytime now, the adults in the room are going to put a stop to it. I was wrong. I hit my breaking point a few years ago when two boys in Connecticut took both first and second place in a state track meet the first time. I have to say the first time because before graduation, they did it more than once. In any case, I thought that surely that would be the tipping point. To have not one but two boys dominating girls' sports, basically competing against each other and leaving the girls to compete for third, surely the responsible adults in the room would recognize it was time to take action. But that didn't happen. Instead, the adults in authority positions were defending the travesty and acting in all seriousness like the records these boys set were somehow legitimate. That was when I decided I had to get personally involved. I wasn't a politician, a celebrity, a scientist, or a famous athlete. I had no pull. But it occurred to me that if nothing else, at least I was an adult. I had a duty to stand up for the literal children, these high school girls whose rights were being trampled all over. At this point, it was clear that there was no level of ridiculousness that transgender ideology could cause that would convince the people in power that it had gone too far. It wasn't going to go away on its own, so I knew I had to play any part I could, no matter how big or small, in standing up for reality. I started off by searching for like-minded people to educate myself and hopefully to join forces with. It took a while. I literally Googled the phrase turf groups, trying to find groups to join. I knew so little at the time, I didn't even know that the women referred to as turfs consider the term to be a slur, as I now do, and that the label was assigned to them rather than the term they use for themselves. But eventually, I found online spaces and people to follow, and I spent several months just soaking up as much information as I could. When I felt knowledgeable enough to start contributing, I started taking action by speaking at nearby school board meetings. I also take actions like writing to politicians and responding to governmental consultations and policy proposals that are open to public comment. I've also done 2 major protests to raise awareness, which are the reason I've been asked to speak to you today. For these protests, I ran a full marathon carrying a flag that said Save Women's Sports, along with the definition of woman, which is adult human female. My family tried to talk me out of these protests. The flag is large. At 5 feet long, it's almost as big as I am. But I was determined to do something concrete and highly visible. In general, I'm a huge proponent of real-life, boots-on-the-ground actions. A lot of great work is being done online, but as we all know, big tech censors those of us who dare to point out reality on their platforms. Also, the general public is on our side, but they often don't take action because they simply aren't aware of how bad things have gotten. They don't hang out in the same online space as we do, which is why I'm a big advocate of taking actions out in the real world to educate them and move them to act. The first race I did with the flag was in 2019 at the Indianapolis Monumental Marathon. The second was in 2020. Since races were canceled due to the pandemic, I went to the NCAA headquarters. There's a path that runs right in front of their buildings, so I ran back and forth on that path until I'd run a full marathon. That little stretch of path was about a tenth and a half of a mile long. So for those who don't know, a marathon is 26.2 miles. So that was quite a lot of back and forth. For both races, I was worried about being physically attacked, especially for the NCAA protest, because I was really a sitting duck for that, running back and forth over the same spot for hours. I was constantly worried that some local sex denialist would see me and whip up a mob to attack me before I could finish. Fortunately, that didn't happen. I think God was watching over me that day. I got nothing but positive feedback from the people who commented on my flag in person. I also did practice runs with the flag for both marathons and got nothing but encouragement for that. The online reactions were where things were more mixed. For my 2019 marathon, I made a Facebook post with pictures explaining what I'd done and why. It blew up. I was amazed at the support from women all over the world. They commented things like solidarity from New Zealand and called me a shiro, which I wasn't expecting. Even though I'd posted on Facebook, news of the protest made its way to Twitter, where my account that I hadn't touched in about a decade ballooned up to over 1,500 followers. But, of course, along with the support came the vitriol from the sex denialists. From the time I'd spent educating myself, I'd known to expect this, which was honestly a huge help in dealing with it emotionally. Someone threatened to trip me while running. I was told to just die. Someone posted that meme of the anime girl pointing a gun at the viewer, captioned, "Shut the F up, TERF." The words garbage and trash were used a lot. People attacked my athletic abilities, calling me mediocre and telling me to try harder. Someone posted a photo captioned, "Finally, a line of lipstick made exclusively for TERFs." The photo was tubes of super glue. Someone said they hoped my post went viral and I lost every sponsorship and scholarship I applied for. There were a lot of comments about my race, which I wasn't expecting. It was unpleasant and rattling. In spite of the abuse, however, I noticed a few things that gave me hope. One is that the insults were limited strictly to the comments of my post. While I had several people reach out to me with private messages, not one of them did so to abuse me. Multiple messages, in fact, were support from acquaintances I'd known for years but with whom I rarely spoke, who took the time to reach out to thank me, which was very touching. In fact, I only got one message that could even be categorized as unsupportive, an acquaintance from college who told me that I deserved what was being said to me, but who was not herself technically abusive. This suggests to me one of either two things. One, that the members of this mob are cowards, happy to hurl abuse from the relative anonymity of a whole crowd of people doing the same, but afraid to engage someone who disagrees with them one-on-one. Or two, that the cruel comments were just for show. Among the adherents of gender ideology, attacking a non-believer can bolster one's status as woke. But if the attack is carried out where no one can see it, is there then any point? Evidently not. This is not the behavior of people who have the moral high ground. Another thing that carried me through was reminding myself of my original purpose, to stand up for the schoolgirls who shouldn't be having to fight this fight. I figure that if all this hate has to be aimed at someone, better me, an adult, than the children. So I'm continuing to fight. Sometimes it's little things like wearing my Save Women's Sports singlet to races. Sometimes it's things that require more planning, like last year when I organized a group of women to pass out flyers at the Chicago Marathon about Article 7 of the Declaration. This year, I organized a group of women to march in a local 4th of July parade to pass out brochures for Save Women's Sports. We had a very positive reception for that. I also have another protest tentatively planned for later this year. I don't want to give away too much and risk the sex denialists sabotaging it, but I will say this. This witch doesn't burn, and I hope to have an exciting update within the next few months. Something I'd like to emphasize is that I never have been and never will be a star athlete. I was never a state champion, and I will never be an Olympian. But I worked hard and I put the time in, and I still had a fulfilling high school career, able to accomplish the more modest goals I set for myself. I made the varsity team when I went out for cross country. I broke my high school's all-time record for girls pole vault. I won several small invitational meets, and I placed well at some bigger ones, like taking the silver at county one year. My senior year, I finally made it to the state track and field championships. I was never going to win there. Just getting to go was all I dreamed of. So I'm just an everyday athlete who's passionate about sports. There are people who argue that means that I have no right to speak on this issue, but I disagree. If anything, I think being average qualifies me to speak to issues that are often invisible to media headlines. A while ago, the Associated Press published an article minimizing the impact of boys competing in girls' sports. They claimed that trans-identified people compete all the time and successfully fly under the radar. As an example, they wrote about a male track athlete who, in high school, won several events in small and mid-size meets, and took 6th and 10th place in the state championships. They present it as an example of it being okay for boys to compete as girls because this boy didn't totally dominate the state championships and there were no media headlines about it. To me, this example proves the opposite point, that this problem is far more widespread than we know. An athlete like that is precisely the kind that would have quietly destroyed my high school sports career, all without so much as a peep from the media. An athlete who places at state, even if he isn't winning, is good enough that he's winning smaller meets and bumping girls from his school out of getting to compete at all, because for invitationals, each school only gets to send 2 athletes per event. In other words, a single boy can do a lot of damage to girls' sports, even if he doesn't win every competition he enters. So I'd like to encourage everyone not to let the sex denialists belittle you into thinking you don't have a right to protest and stand in solidarity with female athletes of any sport or any level. They will dismiss incidents of a boy dominating girls' high school sports by saying, it's not like it's the Olympics, as if high school sports aren't important too. They'll try to tell you that you aren't allowed to protest a man competing in a women's sport unless you're directly affected. Last year, for example, I went to the cyclocross national championships with a group of women to protest the fact that organizers were allowing a man to compete in the women's category. Sex denialists watching perceived that our group wasn't an expert on cyclocross, and they tried to use that to invalidate our arguments. We need to not let them do that. First of all, I would point out that they don't obey those rules themselves. Scores of sex denialists will defend the rights of trans identified males to compete in female sports, even if they are not trans identified themselves, not athletes in that particular sport, or not even athletes at all. But second of all, they're just trying to divide us to make it so that every time a man competes in a women's sport, the only people who are allowed to object are the women directly competing against that man. But that is not valid. Everyone can feel empathy for the women and girls who are losing out on opportunities, even if it's not their sport, or even if they don't do a sport at all. And we all have the right to fight for what we believe is morally correct. The only way to win is by standing together with all female athletes. Arguably, the reason this madness has gotten so far is because everyone is hoping that it won't happen to them or to their sport. So, what I would advise of athletes is to not wait until there's a male in your sport, in your level, in your town, standing next to you on the starting line or facing off against you on the field or court. We all need to band together to stop this encroachment across the board in every sport at every level. You don't need to be an Olympian to do it. You can be an average athlete like me, or even just a supporter of sports or fairness in general. We all have a right and a duty to do whatever we can to stand up for fairness. Thank you.
And thank you very much for that. Wow, I just can't comprehend the hate and viciousness that people have towards women who just want, fairness in sports or, equality. It is just so
Mhm.
unbelievable and frightening. And you said that you also received some threats or
Yeah, I did. Anyone who's active online has probably seen that meme of the anime girl that's like, "Shut the f up, turf," pointing a gun, at the viewer. I got that. I got the person who threatened to trip me.
wow.
Um, Yeah, the lipstick one, is like, that old comic of, like, what I would do to the suffragettes, and it's, like, the
Yeah,
woman, like, with her mouth, like, unable to speak. It's like, it's literally a modern day version of that, like, "Here, turf, here's your lipstick, it's a tube of super glue."
right.
It's just amazing these people can't see, their misogyny for what it is.
Unbelievable. And we're the hateful ones. We're the violent
Mhm.
ones.
Yes.
You have some questions from Nina. Emily, what
Mhm.
is your two best advice for those younger than you, and what are your top three asks for adults regarding this particular issue? Advice for young
Uh,
women and the asks for adults in the room that are here.
oh, that's a good question. Um, I guess I'll start with the adults because I think that's easier. It's like adults, we have no excuse not to be taking action on this. I mean, this is just a matter of reality. Boys do not become girls by magic simply by wishing it true,
Mhm.
or even by having a delusion that it's true. So, I mean, it's really just as simple as saying, boys are not girls, and this is not fair for them to compete in girls' sports. So, I think we really need to be speaking up wherever this happens and show up to protests if you can, write your politicians, and just don't be afraid to call it out for how ridiculous it is. Um, yeah, just having courage, basically. Then for girls, um, it's it's tough because um, mean, what I would personally like to see is for girls to protest, not compete. I realize um, that's controversial because in a way you're playing into it. You're asking these girls to sacrifice their opportunities to make a point. And that's not something that I've ever had to do personally because I've never competed directly against a man as far as I know. So, I do think that that would be effective. I think things would probably be resolved pretty quickly if the girls refused to compete. But I also acknowledge that that's a big ask, and it's not like I can walk the walk. It's almost like that's a decision that these girls have to make for themselves.
Right.
But I would advise them to maybe reach out to each other and, don't feel like you have to do it alone. My guess is if you were to reach out to other girls who are competing against this same boy, like you're probably going to find a lot of people who feel the same way and would stand with you if you wanted to stage some kind of protest at the competition. Apart from that, I would just say, um, to girls, you have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to set boundaries around your body. You have the right to assert that your sports matter. Again, this is something that drives me crazy with the sex denialists is they'll be like, oh, it's just high school sports. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It does matter. And girls have a right to say, no, our sports do matter. We're putting time into this. We're putting hard work and blood, sweat, tears into it. It does matter. And we have the right for these sports to be fair. There's a quote that I don't know who originally said it, but girls' sports do not exist to serve as a mental health program for boys with gender dysphoria.
I love that.
And so, yeah, these girls, they're being guilted into, these boys will hurt themselves if you don't give them what you want, or, these are the most marginalized people ever, so you have to give them what they want. No, you don't. You matter too. Your boundaries matter, and you can say no. And just unfortunately, women have had a long history of having to fight to compete. Like my preferred event right now, long distance running. Everyone knew what a woman was a few decades ago, just a few decades ago. Like we're talking, when my mom was young, they told women we couldn't run that far. And the women's marathon was not even an event at the Olympics until just a few decades ago. And meanwhile, the men have had it for over a century. So we've had this long history of having to fight for our sports, and just unfortunately this is the fight of our time. And it's up to us to pick up where the women who came before us left off, and make sure that the next generation of girls has these opportunities.
I noticed you mentioned that many people around you, or many people, you're from Connecticut, correct? Or
No, that was those two boys who took first and second in state are from Connecticut.
oh, they were from Connecticut. Okay.
Mhm.
And you mentioned that a lot of people might agree with you, but they're just silent because they probably don't know everything about it. And then I noticed you mentioned that you wrote to some maybe government officials, legislators.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering, and you don't have to mention any specific names if you don't want to, but what kind of responses have you been getting from them? Supportive or dismissive?
Most don't answer at all. I did get one back from a politician who is proud to have voted for the Equality Act twice, and responded basically telling me how important transgender rights are, blah, blah, blah. So, unfortunately, the area I live, my representatives aren't going to be on my side most likely, but I still have to do what I can by writing them and trying. Um, that's all you can really do.
Right. And that's so unfortunate because I'm actually seeing, this dismissiveness from, politicians. No name, no blame, but I'm seeing that
Mhm,
a lot. It's very
mhm.
it's discouraging.
Yes,
Okay.
for sure.
Right. And so you have some plans for the future. You're going to plan another event, but of course you didn't want to say too much about it.
Hmm.
But if you would like, if you when those plans are finalized, do keep us posted. We will keep everything confidential. And I know I personally would like to support you in any way that I can.
Thank you. Yeah, I will keep you updated for sure.
Right. Thank you so much for coming. And I wish you a lot of luck in the future. And thank you for fighting this. We
Yeah,
are
thank
winning.
you.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you all for coming. And yeah, yeah, this issue is just so important. And I think for a lot of people, it's also the easiest gateway into this issue.
Yeah.
Surveys back that up, that out of all the issues like the bathrooms, the locker rooms, the sports is the one where the transgender ideologists have the least amount of public support. That's where people really draw the line and seem to understand, like, you cannot change your sex, and they recognize that it's unfair. So it's not only an important issue in its own right, but it's also a great gateway for, I think, drawing in supporters for the other aspects
Mm,
as well, because I think people are less afraid, a little bit, on the sports issue to stand up and say,
right.
I support transgender rights, but sports is where I draw the line. Like, I see that a lot. People
I'm
are much more willing to call it out, because it is just so obviously ridiculous.
right. And selective services, by the way, but we won't get into that right now. I think
Yes.
everybody knows what I'm talking about. Okay. Thank you so much for coming, Emily. And we would love to have you back again.
Thank you.
Thank you.